The Rip City Drive.
All right, our next guest does a heck of a job covering the NFL and college football for the BLEAVE Podcast Network. He's going to be at the Combine, and he joins us again here on the Rip City Drive. It's Joe DeLeone. Hey, Joe, good afternoon. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited that we're getting close to the NFL Combine. We're in the heat of NFL draft season, so juiced up as always to talk about the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's so nice. I love this time of year, and it's a lot of fun to look ahead and get an idea of what the draft's going to be about. But I'm wondering for you, going into this Combine, what are your thoughts on this current draft class before you've had a chance to see them up close and personal?
Yeah, I think that this class has just a lot of talent along the defensive line. There's just so many great names at defensive tackle and at edge. And I'm talking about, of course, the two big names, which are Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. But there's just so much fantastic depth as we move on to the back end of the first round, as we move into day 2 and day 3 of this class. There's not maybe as deep of a grouping as we've had over the past couple of years in terms of just sheer numbers because of how much COVID impacted that. But we still have, a really, really good group of guys, and I think where the attention is going to be drawn to is the defensive line.
What about the quarterback situation? I'm interested in what you think of Bryce Young and the size issue and all that.
Yeah, Bryce Young, for me, I had him as graded as my top quarterback just because I think from his ability to analyze what's going on in front of him, his ability to react and make reads effectively and efficiently, his ability to work inside the pocket with just really great demeanor, all that stuff is just so special. But the thing that gets really sticky with a guy like Bryce Young is the size that you mentioned. He is probably going to weigh at like 190 pounds. I'm hoping that he shows up the Combine heavier than that, but that size could hinder him from getting drafted very highly in this year's draft. They do know that the Houston Texans aren't the biggest fans of him because of that size issue, because of how light he is. But if he gets bulked up over 205, maybe close to 210, which is still a lot of weight to add for his frame, he could be fine. But in general, I think this quarterback grouping outside of him and C.J. Stroud are the top two for me. There's just a ton of question marks. Does Hendon Hooker have the ability to step back into where he was at Tennessee before his knee injury? Can Will Levis and Anthony Richardson outwork the holes that they have in their game, despite them having some really nice potential? Just a lot of really big question marks when it comes to this grouping after we start to move past the top two.
Hey, Joe, with C.J. Stroud, the exact opposite of Bryce because he's a big, strong quarterback with, the big arm, and he's, got the ability to move a little bit. What's your take on what you see from him so far?
Yeah, I think C.J. Stroud, for me this year, most of the year I was a bit frustrated. I was hoping that he would take the next step in showing who he is as a quarterback and how he can read everything that's going on in front of him. But as we know, this Ohio State offense doesn't really require a lot of guys to have to be instinctive. It's a lot of one read and go. And a lot of times this season, especially against Notre Dame, was one of those games early on where when the first thing didn't open up, he didn't really know where to go with the football. And we did see a shift, though. When he played against Georgia, I saw a completely different player. I saw a guy that was a playmaker. I saw somebody who, had the ability to extend plays with his legs and pick up rushing plays by extending plays. But I think that C.J. Stroud fits in nicely right behind Bryce Young for me because he's just got a little bit more mental development that needs to happen, but he's got all the tools to be a really fantastic player at the next level.
Now, you mentioned Will Levis and a possible hole in his game. What does he have to do? What does he have to get better at?
Yeah, everything. I mean, he's a great athlete. He's such a good athlete, and he's this big, strong kid. He plays the position like a linebacker, and he's built like a linebacker. But separate from him having one of the biggest arms in the class, if not the biggest arm in the class, I mean, such a tough, strong kid. I watch him as a quarterback, and there's a lot of question marks with his decision making where you'll watch him make a nice throw, and then the next play you're like, where were you going with the football? What was the decision there? Why did you make that decision? you can kind of see things with other quarterbacks where it's like, okay, I understand what you were trying to do, and maybe you missed through or you made a mistake and you didn't see somebody. But there's just a lot of plays on his film where mentally it just doesn't add up, where you're trying to think, man, what was going on there? Separate from that, though, he's one of those guys who has a tendency, and it's not all the time, but a lot of times with these guys with big arms, they will make a lot of easy throws look difficult, and that's not what you want with any quarterback. He's got the arm to throw a really nice deep ball, 80 yards, and to connect with some guys and make some crazy, crazy plays. But at the same time, if he doesn't work on his touch, there could be a really long uphill battle for whatever team selects him and tries to develop him.
We're talking with Joe DeLeone from the BLEAVE Podcast Network, NFL draft expert. What's your take on Jackson Smith and Jigba in terms of physical tools and playmaking ability and what he could bring to the NFL?
I'm a little bit iffy on Jackson Smith and Jigba, specifically for the same reason that I think a lot of people are iffy on him. I had him coming into the year as a late first-round pick, and I wanted to see how does he step up with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave gone? What does he do without those guys to really open things up for him? And if you watch his 2021 tape, there are a lot of instances where attention is drawn towards both those guys. And because he's a good route runner and he's a quality receiver and a really good slot presence, that he was able to also make his own great, fantastic plays. But we didn't get to see that this year. We were robbed of that because he didn't play this year. And I understand if you're trying to get healthy, but sitting out the entirety of the year, I think it might actually hurt him. This is not the situation with Jamar Chase, where he sat out the whole year and it was during COVID and all that, and it really helped boost his draft stock, and it helped him, train and improve and get better during the whole process. But I need to see what he does at the combine. I need to see what has he been doing this whole time. Has he been training? Has he been working his butt off? Has he been getting ready for the NFL, or has he been lounging around? And I know that seems a bit aggressive to say, but I legitimately don't know what he's been doing. And you take that much time off, there's going to be more questions than answers for a player like that.
Joe, I've seen Oregon defensive back Christian Gonzalez listed all over the board, even in the first round. What do you think of him, and where do you think he might go?
Yeah, I think Christian Gonzalez is a very explosive corner in this class, and right now I don't have him graded as my top corner, but I do have a very high second-round pick on him. The length that he brings to the position and his movement capabilities are very intriguing, and that's why I'm very high on him as a player. The only reason why I don't have him higher than an early second-round pick is because of his inability in my eyes to play outside of a zone scheme. And at Oregon, he was playing primarily in a zone scheme, and that really fit his skill set. And I think if he goes to the right system, he's going to be a really, really good player, kind of like James Bradbury, who fits really well on a lot of teams that run a lot of cover 3, cover 2. But if you ask him to play man, I don't know if he's really that guy. I don't think he's got that flexibility and the twitchiness to cover guys one-on-one on a play-to-play basis. I think he better serves if he steps into a situation that is a very heavy zone-oriented defense.
Hey, Joe, another local prospect. The Beavers sure missed him when he wasn't in the offense this year. What about Luke Musgrave at tight end?
Yeah, Luke Musgrave in this tight end class, I will say it's very strange to me that he's getting a lot of hype. And I think that Luke Musgrave is a great player. And when I say a lot of hype, I'm referring to those that have him rated as their top tight end prospect in the class. Now, I think he's a really interesting player to pay attention to. I think he's a very fantastic linear athlete, and he showed some nice things at the Senior Bowl. But him missing most of the season, and a lot of people considering him at the beginning of the year, including myself, as a developmental guy that has got a lot of upside, without him playing, kind of similar to Jackson Smith and Jigba, there's a lot of questions that weren't really answered because he was unavailable for most of the year this past year for the Beavers. But I think you get a Mike Gesicki type who is a very, very good athlete, very explosive linear guy who's going to test really well at the combine. And I think for a team somewhere on day 2, very early day 3, you're getting a great athlete to add into your tight end room. I don't know if he can turn into a premier tight end and an elite tight end in the league for that matter. But at the very least, as Gesicki has been impactful for the Miami Dolphins for some seasons, I think he can be that type of a player who, if he has a good year, he could go for 600-700 yards and maybe a few touchdowns.
Joe, interested in your opinion here. What do you think the Bears ought to do? What should they do, and what do you think they will do?
Yeah, for the Chicago Bears, I think that you got to trade back. I look at the fact that last year, the quarterback class was just so terrible that a lot of teams decided to wait and hold off on getting their guy. And last year, it felt like there weren't a lot of teams that really needed a quarterback. This year is the complete opposite. There are so many teams, especially in that top 10, that need to go and get their guy, with the Colts, with the Las Vegas Raiders, maybe even with the Seattle Seahawks, the Washington Commanders, the Houston Texans. With all those options and now all these quarterback desperate teams that put off going and getting a quarterback, they need to take advantage of what this year's class brings to the table. They cannot wait any longer. And I think for the Bears' sake, they just need to be working the phones. If you miss out on the opportunity to get a Will Anderson or a Jalen Carter at the top, I think that it still better serves you to get as many draft picks as possible for the future, because the only way that you are going to cultivate success for your roster is by getting as many high draft picks as possible to then build out your roster. Trading away Justin Fields, I don't think is going to really set them up for that same level of success as many people anticipate it could.
We're talking with Joe DeLeone from the BLEAVE Podcast Network here as he gets ready for the Combine. All right, the Seahawks, we got a lot of Seahawks fans here in the Portland area. As you know, they got all that draft capital in that deal with Denver in the Russ trade. Mm-hmm. They had 6 rookies who started for them last year, which is impressive. They've got 2 first-round picks. What makes sense for them?
I honestly believe where they're sitting at 5 and at 12, that it would benefit them to potentially draft a quarterback with one of those picks. And I think that Geno Smith had a really fantastic year, a really, really nice year, and he's going to be a really great bridge quarterback. But for how old he is, I think we can all agree here that he's not really the long-term answer for the Seattle Seahawks at quarterback. In a few years' time, and I don't know if it's 3 years or 5 years, they're going to need to reset, even if Geno continues to progress and look as good as he did last year. So I think one of those picks needs to be spent on a quarterback, and they should at least consider doing it. And then the other I would say is that building out that defensive line, adding some athletes at linebacker and at corner. I'd look at guys like Joey Porter Jr. as a tall, long corner, or even a guy like Christian Gonzalez. Miles Murphy is a name to pay attention to along the defensive line. But there's just a lot of good options. I would just continue to build out that defensive line, as we know that Pete Carroll has used their defense as the backbone of the team in his time there.
Hey, Joe, I know that the Combine is a terrific time to network and to talk to people around the league, because you've got all those different personnel guys and executives in one spot for an extended period of time. But as a talent evaluator, what are you looking for, and what are you trying to gauge from the workouts and the different things that you're viewing? What is it you're looking for, and what do you gauge from that?
Right. As an evaluator watching those guys do those and perform those drills, you kind of already have a sense after you've watched the film of who's going to be the most athletically gifted guys there. There shouldn't be much of a surprise when certain guys test really well or move really well. It's just kind of a confirmation on that information. But instead, what you're looking for are the guys that outperform the expectations, the ones who run a really fast 40, even though you weren't really expecting it. And having that, your eyes open to guys who end up performing well allows you to go back and look at the tape and maybe think over if you want to reevaluate your draft grade on a particular player because they tested well. But just in general, you just want to see how these guys move, how they measure amongst the group. One other thing that always gets really interesting, especially for like offensive and defensive linemen, is helping create some separation between the top guys and maybe the middle guys, is that you can usually pretty quickly see, wow, this guy is an elite athlete, and the guys that I had ranked close to him are good athletes, but not the same level of explosive as the top guys in the group.
All right, got one more question for you, Joe. The Oregon State Beavers were able to land DJU, which was a surprise for anyone outside of this area, and I think a surprise for a lot of Beaver fans. What do you think about DJU, and what are some things that he needs to work on now that he starts this new tenure with the Beavers?
Yeah, I admittedly was very high on DJ Uiagalelei coming into the season because I was hoping under a new offensive coordinator that he might do better. But that didn't really happen, and we saw a lot of the same issues that he was dealing with came back up to bite him in the butt. A lot of issues with decision-making, a lot of issues with holding on to the football, and I think him going to the West Coast, coming back to the West Coast, being in a new setting, coming to a team that's got a lot of really nice offensive weapons and a quality offensive line is really going to help him. But the big thing here is that can he ascend outside of the restrictions that he had at Clemson? Is he going to step up and develop compared to what we saw in his whole time when he was playing for Clemson? He didn't improve since his freshman year. Is he going to improve now that he is in a better spot with a better offensive coordinator and a better, more offensive-minded head coach? That, to me, is really, really key. And I'm hoping that because he's got some better outside threats, he's got a good running back to work with, that he's going to have a much better year this season. And he's still got all the traits, to be a first-round pick. It's just, can he bring it all to fruition is the big question mark.
All right, Joe DeLeone, the BLEAVE Podcast Network, college football and NFL insider, also a draft analyst on Twitter at Joe DeLeone. Hey, Joe, you're the man. I'm really upset that you changed your Twitter Avi because I liked it when you were flexed, but I can live with that. You got to show off the guns, man.
I had to change it up.
Yeah, I understand. All right, well, hey.
I had to change it up. That picture was from my sophomore year of college, so it was it was a little outdated.
That's all right. Well, hey, we always appreciate it. Enjoy the combine, and we'll catch up with you in the future.
Of course. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.